Welcome to another video in the Timco Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. Right now, we're working on building out our first section of work, which is the basic cash register. In this video, we're going to wire up the event aggregator. And now what that's going to do is allow us to have some inter-form communication. Now, if you're a Patreon supporter, the $5 per month level or higher, make sure you head over to get the latest source code. Either way, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the little bell to notify you so you can follow along. And finally, as you think of suggestions, please leave them down in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts on this course. In fact, we're going to start off this video not by doing event aggregation, by fixing some bugs we have instead. Okay, so there's a couple of comments that I got after the last video that were really helpful, and we're going to go ahead and implement those right away just to kind of clean some things up. Okay, so please let me know what you see in these videos, what you want changed, what you have suggestions for the future. I put them on a list. I look through them, I think about them, and I may even ask for some feedback from them as well before we actually put them in place. Okay, so with that being said, let's get started. So I have opened the project. If we go to Team Explorer, there's no changes here. And if we go to sync and do the fetch, there's going to be no changes on the server either. So we're good to go. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of go back over what we did last time because there's some changes to be made. Specifically in the sales view model, there's a couple of issues. Of a way that Caliburn Micro especially handles different types. So I did string because if we notice over here in sales view, this quantity is a text box. So it makes sense it's going to return text. But what we can do in Caliburn Micro is say, actually, I want this to be an int. I have to change the backing field as well. And that works. What's going to happen now is a little bit of validation actually happens right away. So if the user types in something like test in the quantity box, it's going to outline this box in red and say, no, that's not a valid value. But if you put 1, 2, 3, 4 in there, that's fine. And it's going to be a valid value and allow it. So even though it's a text box, we can have the wired up property be a different type, and it will do that conversion for us and validate to make sure that it is valid data that's going in. Okay, so that's a really handy little tool to have So that's another suggestion that came from the comments. I really appreciate it. So those are the two that I had that I thought we need to do in this video. There's a whole running suggestion list of other things that we should probably address at some point. Another one that came up that we'll address in the future is for login page, we use the email address for the username. So email address and password, which is great because typically one person has one email address associated with one person, meaning I have multiple email addresses, but they're only mine. Okay. So I don't share one with somebody else. Now, occasionally that's not true, but for login purposes, usually you have that one email address that you control that's just for you, and that's what you use. The problem is the email addresses change, whether page. That's what the ideal is. So how do we do that? Because the shell view has to know about the login event and if it worked or not, and so on. Well, the way we do that is we broadcast the entire WPF application. Here's a new event. And then anybody listening for that specific event can then act upon it. Okay? So what we're going to do is when the login page, the login button is clicked and it successfully logs a user in, we're going to broadcast an event that says, hey, someone just logged in. And when that happens, the shell view is going to listen for that event and say, okay, since someone just logged in, I can close the login button or login page, and I can open up an instance of the sales page. So that's what we're going to do. There's a little more complexity to it because we have to also close out and kind of refresh that login page so you don't save those credentials accidentally. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. The place to start is actually in Bootstrapper. So Bootstrapper is where we set up things a long time ago, it seems like, at least in this course. So we set up Bootstrapper, and this is where we configure the container and where we brought in all the view models and set some on startup things like the shell view model is what starts. Okay, so these are all the things we configured way back when. Well, one of the things we added is we added this event aggregator. Now, this was something that's built into Caliburn Micro. And this is one of the reasons why I like Caliburn Micro, is that it is somewhat opinionated, meaning it has an idea of what is best, and it tries to point you in that direction. Some people don't like opinions in their frameworks. They like to have the ability to pull things in whatever order they want and whatever type they want, and kind of mix and match. I prefer to have some opinions in my framework, like this is the event system you'll use, this is the window manager system you'll use, and so on. because, well, even the container type or the container. So those are kind of things that I like to have opinions on, because then, first of all, I know it's going to work with my framework. Second of all, when it comes to documentation, they're going to document what they have opinions on. And so I know there'll be more documentation for that than for something else. And third of all, it just makes it easier. I don't have to make a decision about what dependency injection system to use, or what event aggregation system to use, or even be able to find those and have 18 different moving pieces. With Calibre and Micro, it just brings in these basic things you're going to need and says, if you want them, they're already here. So in our case, we already brought it in because we knew we were going to need it at some point. We just haven't used it yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually use this event aggregator to pull in that wherever we need it. The first place we need it is in the login view model. So we're going to bring it in right here. We call it events. And this, again, is the beauty of dependency injection, is that I didn't have to know how to instantiate it. I didn't have to know how to set it up. Nothing. I just said, you know what? I want it. Give it to me. And now I have it. Okay? So now I can use it in anywhere in this class. So what I'm going to do is I am going to come down to our login, and right afterwards, I'm going to raise an event. And the event's going to say, hey, someone logged in. That's all it's going to be. So I'm going to say events dot, and I have a few options here, but the option I want is this publish down here. There's actually a few of them. There's publish on background thread, on current thread, on UI thread, and UI thread async. The one I want is publish on UI thread. What it's going to do is make sure that if this were to have slipped off the UI thread and gone to a event classes. So on my desktop UI project, I'm going to right click and say add folder. I'm going to say event models. Inside here, I'm going to right click and say add class. I'm going to call this class the log on event. I'm going to get public. Now here's what seems like a weird thing. I don't have to put any properties, methods, or events inside this class. In fact, at this point, I don't think I need to. So what I can do here is say new log on event. And I should really rename that event model. So let's do that. Now it used to be if you renamed it over here on the right, and it would pop up a box saying, do you want to rename it on the left as well, like the actual class? But now we can say, just rename it in the class and then control dot. And one of the options is to rename the file to logon event model. Notice over here on the right, the logon event, if I hit enter now, it changes to logon event model. Okay. Now, the one thing that didn't do then is it didn't also rename it. So notice over here, new logon event, and the event model. Okay. So I'm going to publish and say, pass in a logon event model, which is empty. There's nothing in it. So why would I do that? Why do I create an empty class for an event? Well, the reason why is because that then differentiates it from other calls. And it's very obvious that this is a logon event model. So you know exactly what it's doing, what it's for. So in this case, it's the logon event. It's not the log off event. It's not the, I almost crashed the computer event. It's not the error event. It's not anything else. It's the logon event model. So when we're subscribing to this, we're subscribing just to logon events, not to every type of event. Okay. So we don't have to pass any data. There's no data really to pass. We could, kind of fudge it up and pass data across. Like we could say, maybe we'll pass the username and password. But that doesn't make sense because right up here, the get logged in user info, if we control F12 to go to the implementation, just to show you that real quick, this is actually an interface. So it's the API helper. If you hit F12, it goes to the interface. But if you control F12, it goes to the implementation, if it can find it. But in this case, of course, it can. So this is what's happening. We're loading this logged in user, which we can get from the dependency injection system. So wherever we need the logged in user information, we just ask for it. And that's a singleton so that whenever we update in one spot, it's updated everywhere already. So we don't have to pass in this information right down here because we already have it. So there's not really a point to doing it that way. And I don't want to try and confuse matters by having information in two different spots, and one might become outdated, and that's not a good idea. So this way, we're just saying, hey, a new logon event happened. No information necessary. So that's all there is to the broadcast side. Just take that event aggregator and say publish on UI thread, since this is a UI thing. And we're just saying logon event model. That's it. Okay. No other changes besides bringing in the event aggregator and storing it longer term. Okay. So now we've got the yes, we logged on event. Now let's go to the other side of things. Let's close these out. Let's go to the other side, which is the shell view model. And the shell view model, we want to listen for that event. And that takes a couple of steps. First of all, up here in our shell view model, we have it inherits from conductor. But then we also want to implement an handle, and we want to handle the log on event model. And control dot for that. So this is pretty cool. Now let's control dot, first of all, to implement that interface. And that adds one method called handle. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I love how this is named. And this is why good naming is really important and also really valuable. What do you think this interface does? It handles the logon event model. Now you could call it logon event, and maybe you should. And I'm kind of debating that. Because if we call it logon event, then it makes it even more readable. But logon event model kind of indicates that it might have information inside of it. But I think I kind of want to have it be logon event after all. Kind of go back and forth, but let's do this. Logon event, control dot, let's rename it everywhere first. and then control dot again and rename that file. So if you go in that order, it works. If you just can't do it in the opposite order. Okay, so I handle the logon event. That reads great. You know exactly what it's doing. So what happens with a logon event? Well, when we handle a logon event, it calls the handle method, and it passes in that logon event object. Now, in this case, we don't really care about the object because it's empty, but we can do stuff in here like close out that login form, open up the sales view. Now, if we just did just this and we put some code in here, it wouldn't work quite yet. And the reason why is because there's another piece to handling events. So we've said we handle logon events, but we also have to register that we listen for events at all. Okay, so there's two pieces to it. So now we need to bring in, just like we did with the login view model, we brought in this event aggregator. I'm going to copy and paste it in right here. And then do kind of the same thing as before, where once I clean this up, and we'll wire it up like so. So now I have that event aggregator. What I can do is say _events dot subscribe. So I'm subscribing to events and saying, well, who's subscribing to events? And almost always you're going to say, well, I am, or this. This represents the current instance of this class, whatever instance you're right now in. And the reason why you have to tell it who is subscribing is because the event aggregator has to say, okay, I'm remembering who's subscribing so that when an event happens, I'm going to send that event to every subscriber, even if they're not listening for that particular type. Okay, so it's going to broadcast down and it's going to look and say, well, the shell view model listened for, let's say, I handle string. Nope. So don't send it down. But then the next event comes along and says, okay, does shell view model listen for logon event? Well, yes, it does. So therefore, call shell view model dot handle that's overloaded for that particular type logon event. And it's going to call that method. So that's what's going to happen. And that's the two pieces on the subscriber side that you have to do. One, you actually have to handle the event types you're listening for. And if you have multiple, you can just keep having multiple listed out here. Remember, you can have as many interfaces as you want. Now, and let's just show that real quick. I handle string. Because you can create a string event. I control dot. And now notice I have a second handle event, this one for string. So that's all you have to do for implementing multiple. So that's part one. Have the handler specify what events you're listening for. Part two is to subscribe to events in general. Okay, so now we have an event that's going to fire whenever we log in. And that's successful login. So right down here at the bottom, we log in, we're going to wait for this to be done. If there's any problems, it goes to the catch. It never hits this line down here. But if there is no problems, it will get to this line right here that says publish in the UI thread a new logon event. And with that, this will get triggered. So now what do we do in here? Well, we have a few options. So the first thing I want to do is I want to close out that event, or to close out that form, which really isn't much of anything. It's just, let's just activate a new form. Well, the new form is going to be the sales view model. So let's bring that in. Sales view model, let's call it sales VM. And I'll copy that. And then we'll bring it in. Let's do this. Let's move things around a little bit. And I want to, bring in that sales VM too. And then down here, we can say is activate item sales VM. So when we log in, it's going to essentially close out the login view and open up the sales view. The reason that I say essentially is because you can only have one item active at a time when you have this conductor. Okay, notice right here, if you mouse over, it says an implementation that holds onto and activates only one item at a time. So that's what we're going to do. Now, that doesn't destroy the login view model because we're still holding on to that instance here. The problem there is if we were to open back up the login view, it would have the username and password still there and any other properties that are set behind the scenes. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to go back to the bootstrapper and look at this simple container. This simple container, we actually add to itself. So if we ask for a simple container, we'll get this container. And the reason why this is important is because we can then, in our dependency injection system, let's just hit enter here and say simple container. And then we can capture this up here like so. And then we can, let's just, before I forget, then we can do is we can actually, we need a comma here. We can request new instances whenever we want. So we can say after this view model has been updated, we can override the current login view model. So login VM equals container.getInstance of type login view model. What that'll do is get a new instance of it and place it into our login VM. So that kind of wipes out that login VM so that whenever we need it in the future, it's clean and fresh and does not have any sensitive information in it. Now, you may have noticed, and you may be grumbling already, this is a lot of stuff in our constructor. And you know what? Yeah, it is. But it's not really hurting anything. But at the same time, maybe it's not ideal for this particular form. Because this form, or this view model, controls all the other views in the system. And sometimes it doesn't seem like we need to have all this. We can just say, you know what? Just ask for the container and then do this for any type we want, without doing the store up here in the private variable and so on. And yes, we can do that. So we don't have to ask for every form or every item even. We can just get it when we need it. But there's a downside to that. And here's the downside. The sales VM. Let's just say we started entering information on a checkout page. So we've added 3 things to the cart and we go, oh, you know what? I need to go to a different form for some reason. Let's just say they want to sign up for our frequent shopper card. So we pull up a new form that's the frequent shopper card sign up form. And we fill in the information and we hit submit. And then we go back and say, well, you know what? Container, get me an instance of the shopping cart again, or the sales view model. And they do, and it's blank because it's not a singleton. So you just lost all of their cart, all their information. And that's not ideal. Whereas if we already have that instance, we can come back to it multiple times and the cart stays where we left it. Okay. So the basket is half full, and the basket's half full when we come back. So that's the other end of it, is that might be what we want to do for some things. So I think that the way to cut down on some of this is we can get rid of asking for the login VM. We can get rid of storing the login VM. We can get rid of wiring the login VM. And once we copy this, we can get rid of this line as well. And instead, when we activate item, we can just immediately ask for an instance of a login view model. That way it's fresh every single time, because the view models are not singletons. They're per request, meaning every time you request it, it gets a new instance of it. Therefore, whenever we stop using this, we deactivate it, the login view will go away. So it will never have data from a previous call, which is actually ideal for the login form. We don't want that data to be stored accidentally. So this actually makes it a little simpler, and it reduces the number of things we're passing in here. But at the same time, I'm not going to do that for the sales view and the event aggregator. All of that one is up for debate probably. I do think that I might use it in the future to also broadcast events, not just subscribe to events. So I'll leave that one the way it is. So it's kind of that balance you want to hit is, do you want it for the life of this instance, or do you want it for a new instance every time that you want to load it? And different forms will have different answers, or maybe different circumstances will have the same form have different answers. So it really is dependent on your situation, not just one blanket, this is how you do it. All right, so let's see this in action and see how we do. I'm going to launch this. Remember, it launches 2 things. It launches the API, which is right here, and it also launches the APF login form. So let's put our username and password in. We'll log in. And you went right to the sales page. Isn't that cool? Now the sales page is cut off. So it's not quite tall enough here. And notice no matter how you move this, there's not enough space over here. There's a little bit of space, not enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the spacing over and give it more space on the left and on the right and on the bottom. The top I think is fine. I think it's fine where it's at right now. So that's what we'll do. And we'll also make this form a little bigger because, that's not quite big enough. We want to make it a little bigger. Okay. So once that's stopped, we have to stop both of those, by the way, in order to stop this, or just hit the red button. Let's go to the shell view and we'll change the height and width. This is the starter height. So let's change it to 550, or maybe let's make it around 600. 600, and the width, let's make 1,000. Up again and see what we get. There's the API, there's our login form. It didn't really change the login form because the login form is designed to be centered. So tcorey@imtimcorey.com, and our password, super secret, PWD12345, period. Hit login. Haha, I typed it wrong. Oh, you know why? It's not T. Corey. It's Tim. I have so many email addresses. Login. There we go. So now you can see the whole sales page. These items, items in the cart will expand this horizontally because they'll get larger as the width of items inside them get larger, which is what you want WPF to do, to grow and shrink as needed. But we have some good spacing over here, so that's good. All right, so I think that's where we should stop right now. We've got the sales page coming up. We've got the login form working where if it correctly logs in, then it closes out and it takes us to the sales page. We've got the event aggregation system in place so that if we have any other events we want to listen to in other places, we can do so. And I think we're set now for the next step, which will be the next video. And that is, I want to bring some data from a database all the way in and populate this items list so we can start wiring up this sales page and actually have it do something. And we're going to get to the point where I'm not sure if it's going to be next video or the video afterwards, but where this sales page actually does something, where you can select something, give it a quantity, add to the cart, remove things in the cart, and have these calculate. So that's coming, but the first thing that's coming up is just populating data here, which we'll have to put some data in our database, just kind of dummy data, but actually populating data here so we can start working with it on the sales page. Okay, but until then, thanks for watching. As always, I am Tim Corey.